Helen Keller is known around the world as a symbol of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.
Helen Keller was so important to changing the attitudes all over the world toward handicapped people, but in particular, blind people and deaf and blind people.
Whilst working on what would become his most famous series of paintings, The Frieze of Life.
Long before cameras fit in our pockets, capturing a human face was rare and difficult. Early photography didn't just record images. It froze real people who lived through revolutions, empires, and wars we usually know only from paintings and books. Some of these faces belong to people who fought in the American Revolution, met Napoleon, or shook hands with George Washington, and went on to change the course of world history. What you're about to see are real photographs of historical figures who lived long enough to be captured on camera. Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria ruled in a century of revolution, grandmother of Europe and Empress of India.
Queen Victoria, who reigned as monarch of the United Kingdom from 1837 until her death in 1901, was not only one of the longest-serving sovereigns in British history, but also one of the first major world leaders and one of the biggest historical figures to have her life extensively documented through photography. She ascended the throne at the age of 18, just 2 years before photography was publicly announced, and quickly embraced the new medium alongside her husband, Prince Albert. Together, they were famous patrons of photography. The royal couple always commissioned daguerreotype and carte de visite portraits of themselves and their family, and helped popularize the technology across Britain and beyond. Aside from taking photos, Victoria collected a lot of images, experimented with techniques, and used photographs to shape her public image in ways that painted portraits could not. These photographs offered a unique visual record of Queen Victoria's life, as we can now see her photos from a young queen to an iconic royal, and even as a grieving widow. It's also a good sign of the rise of photography in the Victoria era. But she wasn't the only royal who was crazy about photographs. The leader of France was also doing the same at the same time, Napoleon III.
Napoleon III. He was the actual nephew of Napoleon, but basically created modern Paris.
Napoleon III, born Charles Louis. Napoleon Bonaparte, on April 20th, 1808, was an important figure in 19th century French history who witnessed the rise of photography and lived long enough to be photographed. He was the nephew of Napoleon I and began his political career as the first president of the French Second Republic in 1848, before seizing power in a coup d'etat in 1851 and declaring himself the Emperor of the French in 1852, founding the Second French Empire. His reign, which lasted until 1870, brought 2 decades of relative property, modernization of the French economy, and ambitious urban projects in Paris. But it ended in defeat and capture by Prussian forces in the Franco-Prussian War, leading to his exile and eventual death in England in 1872. Napoleon III's life was filled with a lot of photographs, especially since he was the first modern French head of state to rule during that age. He used his photographs a lot for political propaganda and dynastic purposes. Today, numerous photographs of him survive, including album and prints and carte de visite made in the mid to late 19th century. This is a rare documentation of the monarch whose rule shaped modern France and ended traditional monarchy. Many other members of the royal family also lived and thrived during the photography era, taking a lot of photos of themselves. Duke of Wellington.
The Duke of Wellington was born in Ireland. His name then was Arthur Wellesley.
Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, was one of the most influential military and political leaders of the 19th century. Born into an Anglo-Irish aristocratic family in Dublin, He embarked on a military career that would see him rise to prominence during the Napoleonic Wars. Wellington first distinguished himself in campaigns in India and later as the commander of British and Allied forces in the Peninsular War against Napoleon's armies. His most celebrated achievement came at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where his strategic leadership, alongside Prussian forces, finally defeated Napoleon and ended decades of European conflict. After his military career, Wellington served twice as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, constantly shaping British political life into the 1830s. He's one of the major historical figures that lived long enough to be photographed. In 1844, at about age 75, he sat for a daguerreotype by the French photographer Antoine Claudet. This was one of the early photographic processes that produced highly detailed images on polished metal plates. It's a rare photo that captures one of history's defining figures. Meanwhile, across France and America, another aristocrat and military officer was getting photographed everywhere he went. Marquis de Lafayette, Marie-Joseph Paul-Yves Roche, Gilbert Dumotier, better known as the Marquis de Lafayette.
In the case of the Marquis de Lafayette, he didn't just witness these events, he often caused them.
Was a French aristocrat and military officer who became one of the most celebrated heroes of the American Revolutionary War and a key figure in the French Revolution. Lafayette volunteered to fight alongside General George Washington, securing important victories and creating a lifelong bond with the American cause. He's known for his leadership during critical campaigns such as Yorktown. Although Lafayette passed away before the widespread adoption of photography, he lived into the era when early photographic technology was emerging. His later life was documented through photographs and prints during his 1824 to 1825 Grand Tour of the United States, when he was greeted by massive crowds. Meanwhile, one of the biggest scientists ever that you might have learned about in biology class was also widely photographed: Charles Darwin.
Charles Darwin, the mild-mannered son of a physician, was once described as the most dangerous man in England.
Charles Robert Darwin was the British naturalist whose groundbreaking theory of evolution by natural selection transformed what we understand about life. After a 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle, where he studied different species and environments, Darwin wrote his seminal work on the origin of species, which laid the foundation for modern biology. Darwin lived through the early decades of photography's development and sat for multiple photographic portraits throughout his life, making him one of the most documented scientists of the 19th century. Between 1842 and his death in 882, he had many photographic sittings that produced images, like the early daguerreotypes and the widely distributed carte de visite. Many of these images show Darwin with his son, and later studio portraits from the 1860s and 1870s by prominent photographers of the day. While Charles Darwin dominated photos in the field of biology, one of the biggest actors in history took a lot of photos before his passing: Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was one of the most influential entertainers of the 20th century, whose life and work spanned from the Victorian era into the modern film age. Born in London in 1889,
Charlie Chaplin was born on April 16, 1889, in London, England.
He rose from a poverty-stricken childhood and early stage work to become a global icon through silent cinema, especially with his unforgettable character, the Tramp. Chaplin was also a writer, director, composer, and producer, helping shape the language of film and comedy with classics like The Kid, The Gold Rush, City Lights, and Modern Times. But Chaplin lived a very long life, until 1977, which means he was photographed throughout his life, from the behind-the-scenes stills in Hollywood to formal portraits in later decades. The photographs document his transformation from a struggling performer to one of the world's most famous men. There are documentary images of Chaplin at work in the 1920s and 1920s, as well as portrait prints from the 1960s, capturing him as an artist and veteran of cinema. Aside from a famous performer, one of the leading painters whose work is in museums today was actually photographed, and you might not believe who it is. Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh was a Dutch post-impressionist painter.
Things in it, when I'm this close to it, really I just sit on my on my couch and admire it. But
Born in 1853 in Zundert, Netherlands, whose bold use of color and dramatic brushwork made him one of the most influential artists in Western art history. In just over a decade, Van Gogh produced around 2,100 artworks, including about 900 paintings marked by striking emotional intensity. Despite his prolific output, he struggled with poverty, mental health issues, and lack of recognition, selling very few works before his tragic death by suicide in 1890. Photography existed during Van Gogh's lifetime, but he was known for being reluctant to be photographed and preferred to express himself through painting. Photograph images of him are extremely rare. The only widely accepted photograph of Van Gogh was taken when he was about 19 years old in 1873, before his artistic career fully began. Some other photos were suspected to be him, but it was later revealed that it was his brother, Theo. We know his face through painted self-portraits, but that single photograph is a rare glimpse at the man behind Starry Night, Sunflowers. Away from art class and into your history books, there are some famous names you won't believe were around in the photography age and had a lot of photos taken of them. Harriet Tubman.
On this Juneteenth, the day that commemorates the end of slavery in the U.S., we end with Chip Reed's story of an American hero.
Harriet Tubman was an American abolitionist and activist born into slavery in Dorchester County, Maryland, and so she was photographed a lot during her time. After escaping bondage in 1849, she risked her freedom repeatedly to lead loads of enslaved people to safety in the North through the secret network called the Underground Railroad. This earned the nickname Moses for guiding about 70 people to freedom without losing a single person under her charge. Even during the American Civil War, she served as a scout, spy, nurse, and recruiter for the Union Army. She contributed to the key operations behind Confederate lines and advocated for the enlistment of African American soldiers. Tubman was a powerful visual symbol of resistance. Multiple photos were taken of her during her lifetime, which we can still find today. These include well-known images from the 1870s that show her seated and dignified, and an unknown portrait from around 1868 to 69, which reveals her in midlife. Not only Tubman, but another activist who was fighting way before her and right at the start of the photography age also took a lot of photos that we can find today. Frederick Douglass.
It was 168 years ago today that Frederick Douglass spoke in Rochester, New York.
Frederick Douglass was an extraordinary American abolitionist, writer, orator, and statesman, born into slavery in Maryland in February 1818 and escaped to freedom in 1830, dedicating his life to ending slavery and advancing civil rights. He became a leading voice in the abolitionist movement, publishing powerful autobiographies that exposed the brutality of slavery and argued for human dignity and equality. Douglass also founded and edited the North Star, an influential anti-slavery newspaper, and later held government positions like a U.S. Marshal and diplomat. What makes Douglass especially remarkable is how he became the most photographed American of the 19th century. sitting for more than 160 portraits between the 1840s and his death in 1895. He constantly used his photos to counter racist stereotypes and shape public perception. Aside from famous activists like these, even presidents recorded in your books actually had photographs taken of them, so look closer when next you see a photo. John Quincy Adams.
John and Abigail, they'd been living in Paris, they'd been living in London, had gotten used to a certain size of residence.
John Quincy Adams, the 6th President of the United States, holds a unique place in American history and the history of photography. Born in 1767, when the American colonies were still under British rule, Adams experienced the Revolutionary era firsthand and went on to serve as a diplomat, Secretary of State, and later U.S. Congressman. It wasn't until March 1843, long before his presidency had ended, that Adams sat down for a daguerreotype portrait with photographer Philip Haas in Washington, D.C. This made him the earliest born U.S. president who had an actual photographic likeness. The process was still in its infancy and produced fragile images on silver-plated copper, capturing the unvarnished likeness. The surviving photo is now part of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery collection. Right after Adams, the next president was also in a photography age, but surprisingly, only one photo of him survived. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States and a dominant figure in early American history, lived long enough to be photographed in the infancy of photography. Many famous images of Jackson before photography are painted portraits, but there's a rare daguerreotype of him which was made between 1844 and 1845, just months before his death at age 78. These early photographs were likely taken by Edward Anthony and Matthew Brady. Jackson's life was marked by dramatic episodes. He rose from humble frontal origins and rose to prominence as a military commander in the War of 1812, especially at the Battle of New Orleans. He later became a powerful and controversial president, known for executive authority and the Indian Removal Act. Aside from famous presidents and freedom fighters, even inventors who found themselves at the early days of photography also took a lot of photos. Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was a Serbian-American inventor, electrical engineer, and futurist whose ideas and inventions helped shape the modern electrical world. Born in 1856 in what is now Croatia, he emigrated to the United States in 1884 and became an important figure in the development of alternating current electrical systems, which still power homes and cities today. Tesla also pioneered technologies such as the Tesla coil, wireless power concepts, early forms of radio communication, and numerous high-frequency electrical experiments that influenced later innovations in lighting and radio. Tesla lived till 1943, so he was photographed extensively throughout his life, from early studio portraits to images showing him with his machines and conducting experiments in his labs. In the Nikola Tesla Museum archive, you can see photos from his school days in the 1870s through his later years. Even the Library of Congress holds photographic prints dating from the early 1900s. These photographs offer a visual record of a visionary whose inventions transformed electrical energy. Meanwhile, the famous inventors who created the planes we fly today also took a lot of photos of themselves. The Wright brothers. Orville and Wilbur Wright were American aviation pioneers who experimented with gliders and motorized flights. Their work finally produced results on December 17, 1903, when they achieved the first sustained, powered, controlled, heavier-than-air flight at Kitty Hawk. On that windy Outer Banks beach, Orville piloted their Wright Flyer Y for 12 seconds and about 120 feet, while Wilbur ran alongside. You might not know this, but that moment was captured on camera by a local life-saving station member, and it is one of the most iconic early photos of human invention in action. The Wright brothers began as bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, applying their mechanical skills and aerodynamic research to solve the complex problems of lift and control. Their work between 1899 and 1903 on gliders, wind tunnel testing, and wing warping control systems laid the technical foundation for modern aviation. The brothers continued flying.
The Wright brothers invented the airplane, right? They invented the airplane. That's huge. Powered flight. This is a problem that nobody else could solve.
And refining aircraft into the 1990s. And so many photos of them and their machines survive, including images of them demonstrating their inventions in Europe. The photos showed Wilbur and Orville innovating the aircraft that eventually introduced aviation to the world. Also, another famous author and activist in the 1800s and early 1900s also had her life recorded in photographs as she changed the world. Helen Keller. Helen Keller was an American author, educator, and activist whose life stands as one of the most remarkable stories of courage over physical challenges. At just 19 months old, an illness, probably scarlet fever or meningitis, left her both blind and deaf. It plunged her into a world without sight or sound, at a time when few educational options existed for people with such disabilities. Helen's life changed dramatically in 1887, when her family hired Anne Sullivan, a young teacher from the Perkins School for the Blind. Sullivan taught Keller a form of tactile communication by spelling words into her hand, unlocking language and understanding. This breakthrough enabled Keller to learn to read Braille, write, and eventually speak with the aid of interpreters. Keller went on to graduate cum laude from Radcliffe College in 1904.
She is the first deafblind person to graduate from a college. She graduated in 1904.
Becoming the first deafblind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. She became a prolific writer and lecturer, advocating for people with disabilities and women's suffrage. She also co-founded the American Civil Liberties Union. From her youth to her later years, you can find a lot of photos of Helen Keller spanning decades. It offers a visual testament to her extraordinary journey. Aside from this author, we also have a leading painter in the same region who didn't only have photos of himself, but also took photos of others. Edvard Munch. Edvard Munch was a Norwegian painter.
Today we're going to be looking at the life and work of the great Norwegian artist, Edvard Munch.
And printmaker, whose deeply expressive work helped shape modern art, especially through his iconic masterpiece, The Scream. Born into a family with illness and loss, Munch's early exposure to suffering influenced his lifelong artistic focus on themes of love, death, and mental turmoil. His style evolved from influences like Impressionism and Symbolism into a powerful precursor to German Expressionism, making him one of the most important artists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Although Munch is best known for his painting, he also engaged in photography. He bought his first camera in 1902 and experimented with the medium to explore composition, self-portraiture, and visual immediacy. He often used unusual angles, motion blur, and other effects that mirrored the emotional intensity of his painted work, and continued photographic experiments into the 1930s, treating imagery as an extension of his artistic inquiry. With photographs of Munch, you can see the mind behind The Scream. Alexander Milliner. Alexander Milliner was one of the last surviving veterans of the American Revolutionary War, whose actual portrait was taken in the age of photography. Born around 1760, he served as a drummer boy in the Continental Army and was present at key engagements during the fight for American independence, including the British surrender at Yorktown. Milliner lived to be over 100 years old. In 1864, long after the invention and popularization of photography, he sat for a photographic portrait produced by Nelson Augustus Moore for the last men of the Revolution, a collection documenting the oldest Revolutionary War veterans. This image is part of a small group of surviving photographs that visually connect us to individuals who directly experience the struggle for American independence. His portrait shows a man whose life spanned from the birth of the US through the Civil War era. But photography is for everyone, and apart from heroes, even outlaws were recorded in photos in the late 1800s. Butch Cassidy. Butch Cassidy was the notorious American outlaw Robert Leroy Parker, who became one of the most famous criminal figures of the American Old West.
Terrorized the banks and the railway companies during the closing decade of the 19th century.
He adopted the alias Butch Cassidy early in life after working as a butcher and taking the name of an older outlaw mentor, Mike Cassidy. Cassidy first came to prominence as a horse thief and cattle rustler before forming and leading a loose gang of bandits known as the Wild Bunch. They specialized in robbing banks, trains, and payrolls across Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, Utah, and Nevada during the late 1890s, and of course, they took photos along the way. Cassidy's gang included figures such as the Sundance Kid, Kid Curry, and others, and eventually became legendary in the frontier era. One of their historical photographs was the Fort Worth Five, taken in 1900 in Texas, which captures Cassidy alongside his fellow Wild Bunch members. After increasing law enforcement pressure, Cassidy and the Sundance Kid fled to South America in the early 1900s. Most historical accounts suggest they were killed in a shootout in Bolivia in 1908. Another criminal who got his photographs taken, although not a lot, was Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid. Born Henry McCarty, Billy the Kid was one of the most infamous outlaws and gunfighters of the American Old West, gaining a legendary reputation during the violent Lincoln County War in New Mexico Territory before being shot and killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881 at about 21 years old. Unlike many figures of his era, photographic evidence of Billy is extremely rare. Historians have only recognized a handful of authentic photos of him. One of the most famous photos is a small ferrotype portrait taken around 1879 to 1880 in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, which shows Billy standing outdoors, holding a rifle with a pistol at his hip. This image was preserved by his friend Dan Dedrick and sold at auction in 2011 for millions, making it one of the most valuable Western Americana photographs ever. Another potential photograph showed him playing a croquet with members of his gang. Hannah Stilly Gorby. And let's end with one of the earliest born people ever photographed, Hannah Stilly Gorby. She was born around 1746, decades before the birth of Mozart or Napoleon, and long before photography existed, and is believed to have been photographed around 1840, when she would have been in her mid-90s. The image of Gorby appears in a 1936 family genealogy and is widely shared as an example of how early photography can connect us visually to people born in eras we usually know only through written records and painted portraits. Her photo connects the pre-photographic 18th century to the emerging visual age of the 19th century. Although other photographed figures, such as Revolutionary War veterans born around the same time, might contend for the title of earliest born person photographed, Gorby's photo is the most reliable. When you hear of historical people such as Chaplin, Tubman, Napoleon, Tesla, and more, you think they are just people in a book, but you might not realize that they once sat in front of a camera and took pictures. Which of these historical figures shocked you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. So, thanks for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one.